Week after week, we've been reporting on the abysmal state of affairs in Pakistan, with the country's economy tottering on the brink of collapse. Inflation has hit the stratosphere. The cost of living crisis is unprecedented. Most Pakistanis are today struggling for survival. Bare essentials are unaffordable and out of reach for many. There are so many today who cannot afford to send their children to school anymore. And if you needed more evidence of how desperate and anguished the Pakistani citizens are today, here it is. In a viral video, a Pakistani man says, "Allah, give us Modi so that he can fix our country." He wants the Indian Prime Minister to govern Pakistan. Yes, that's how bad things really are.
Pakistan, the world's fifth most populous country with nearly 243 million people and the 23rd largest in terms of GDP based on purchasing power parity, is on the brink of collapse. And if the worst case scenario plays out, as some experts predict, the disaster unfolding in Pakistan will have far-reaching consequences. So the questions are, what is the current state of Pakistan's economy, and why is this country still on the verge of bankruptcy? As regards the current state of the Pakistani economy, the country is in full-fledged economic turmoil following a series of disasters. And as the country faces one of its worst economic crises, the situation worsens with each passing day, causing food, gas, and oil prices to rise. When it comes to rising prices, the cost of goods and services in Pakistan is rising faster than ever. As of 2022, inflation reached nearly 25%. In fact, food prices increased even more in poorer rural areas. And now for 2023, a Moody's economist forecasted inflation to reach 33% by the first half of 2023. It's sad that Pakistan is also facing a food crisis, as this crisis has put a strain on a proud Pakistani tradition of feeding the hungry at a time when it's most needed. Pakistan is also heavily in debt, having borrowed millions and billions of dollars from various countries. To worsen it all, Pakistan's poor governance has resulted in a balance of payment crisis, whereby the country is unable to earn enough foreign currency to cover its imports. It has gotten so bad that the Pakistani textile industry is in jeopardy, as it is losing favor with foreign consumers and market share. Also, because domestically manufactured goods rely on imported raw materials. Businesses in Pakistan are at a risk of closing due to supply chain failures. And as the country's foreign reserves are rapidly depleting, imports are surging, and exports are rapidly declining. People's lives have become completely dismal and hellish as a result of this economic crisis and political unrest. A researcher at New Delhi's Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, Kamal Mehdi Shetty, said that Pakistan's economic situation is a direct reflection of the country's misplaced priorities for decades, and he cited the military's overwhelming control over all other institutions as a key factor in the economic situation. According to him, the country's military establishment continues to corner a disproportionate share of resources for itself at the expense of ordinary citizens, explaining that while Pakistan cut spending on infrastructure and education in 2022, military spending increased by 11%. With this in mind, one could say that Pakistan's current crises have been building for a long time, particularly for a debt-ridden economy with no solid political leadership and a kleptocratic elite. And then, while much of Asia has gradually become richer and more stable over the last few decades, it's observed that Pakistan has remained impoverished, chaotic, and volatile. It's quite easy to see why Pakistan's economy has long been characterized by an abysmally corrupt set of policies designed to provide subsidies to civilian elites and military officials, while ignoring the vast majority of the population who work in industries such as agriculture and textiles. Now, the country is dealing with mounting debt, inflated energy import costs, dwindling forex reserves, global inflation, political instability, and a sustained drop in GDP growth. For the government, it is now a race against time to keep the country from collapsing economically, which could severely affect millions of people. Meanwhile, these are not the only contributing factors to Pakistan's economic situation. Pakistan's economy has also experienced a big blow from the devastating flood that hit the country in 2022 from June to October. The flood, which affected nearly 33 million people, is estimated to have cost more than $30 billion in damages. Though the disaster can be blamed in part on wealthy countries' climate change, international aid has been slow and meager, leaving Pakistan to pick up the pieces. Unfortunately, without an immediate bailout package, Pakistan's economy situation is unlikely to improve anytime soon. Speaking about bailout packages, it's important to say that Pakistan has been a recipient of bailout packages from several countries. The oil-rich Saudi Arabia, a longtime Pakistani ally, has come to Pakistan's aid financially on numerous occasions. However, even the Saudis are now demanding significant improvements in governance and corruption before loosening their purse strings. Equally, in January, the UAE agreed to provide Pakistan with a $3 billion lifeline in the form of a rollover of existing debt and new financing, allowing Pakistan to avoid defaulting on its loans for a few more months. It later postponed the maturing $2 billion loan and gave Pakistan another $1 billion in additional loans. Besides this, Saudi Arabia agreed to finance oil derivatives worth $1 billion on deferred payments. But that's not sufficient to fund even a month of Pakistan's oil imports. But that's just the tip of Pakistan's debt. The Arab money is not the only financial aid Pakistan has gotten. In 2019, Pakistan also received a massive $6 billion IMF bailout and another $1 billion added in August 2022 as part of the IMF's 23rd funding program for the country in its 75-year history. In fact, Pakistan has received more than $8 billion in project loan financing from financial institutions such as the Asian Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the World Bank. You might wonder, with all this financial support received by Pakistan, why is the country still on the verge of going bankrupt? It's worth noting that Pakistan, mired in political, military, and feudal corruption, has only survived as a state due to its reliance on the generosity of the Saudis, Chinese, UAE, and Americans, in that order. In fact, the IMF estimates that China is responsible for 30% of Pakistan's total foreign debt, which totals around $30 billion. According to a report, this is 3 times its IMF debt, and far more than its borrowings from the World Bank and Asian Development Bank combined. Pakistan is now firmly entrenched in China's and other nations' debt traps, unable to repay its growing debt to these countries from which it borrowed money and received massive financial assistance. And because it has received billions of naira from the IMF and World Bank, Pakistan is finding it hard to meet its obligations. In fact, as of January 20th, the country's reserves had fallen to around $3.67 billion, and the decrease was mainly due to external debt repayments. Similarly, on January 26, the Pakistani rupee fell by 9.6% against the US dollar, which is said to be the largest one-day drop in 2 decades. Since then, it has slipped even further. And according to State Bank of Pakistan data, the Pakistan rupee has now reached a new historic low of 271.36 per US dollar. Reports also show the rupee declined by 24.51% for the fiscal year that began in July. According to the World Bank, the country's external debt reached $126.3 billion in December 2022. And right now, Pakistan's debt to GDP ratio is approaching 70%, as 40 to 50% of government revenue has been set aside for interest payments this year. With all of this going on in the Pakistani economy, it's all easy to see why the country is on the verge of bankruptcy. Now, it's as though Pakistan can only rely on the IMF for assistance, as both bilateral and multilateral development partners have refused to render financial support. In light of this, Pakistan is currently awaiting a bailout from the International Monetary Fund, as delegations from the agency are currently in Pakistan negotiating. In fact, the negotiations have been stalled since November of last year, all because the finance minister, Ishaq Dar, refused to meet IMF demands to adhere to market-determined exchange rates and take steps to reduce fiscal debt. However, he now has no choice but to comply, because it is quite clear that only the IMF can keep it from going bankrupt. It's also quite clear why funds may not be released as easily to Pakistan this time. With that being said, one can say the IMF bailout will help Pakistan, but will the amount released be enough to bring Pakistan out of its precarious state? No one knows. Please share, like, and subscribe for more related content. Also, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. See you next time!